Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us on this Thursday night. It's wonderful to see everybody, and of course, a warm welcome to you, Justine, and thank you for collaborating with me on this Chanukah talk.
Very exciting. Thank you for having me.
So, for those who don't know me, because I think there's some people who are related to you or connected to you. My name is Rabbi Rabin, and the Rabbi at South Caulfield Hebrew Congregation, and we've been enjoying a lot of Zooms over the last number of months with many of you that are on here tonight, and I think it's been exciting to get out in the real world as well. But it's still such a blessing to have these facilities that we never would have thought of. Like I was speaking to a colleague today that I'm planning to do something next year with, and we never thought that you could do all these shiurim and all these talks. It always had to be bringing the person in person. So I would have had to fly you to Melbourne, and we would have presented in person, and now we've been able to achieve it just right here. So Justine, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we can say how we got connected in collaborating on this shiur tonight.
So my name's Justine. I'm joining you from Sydney. I work at a community engagement organisation called Shalom, where I am the director of PJ Library across Australia and New Zealand. So for those of you who don't know what PJ Library is, all the books behind me are children's books. It's an American organization, and we basically send Jewish values children's books into the homes of almost 4,000 Jewish children across Australia and New Zealand. So I've been doing that for about 6 years. And yeah, I work in the young family space. So
yeah, as I was saying before, I've been a recipient for many years of the PJ Library books. The kids love it, and I think it's just and interestingly now with this age of technology, it's just so nice to actually touch a book and to get something in the mail or to get something in the post. It's like you feel like you're getting a gift every month, so it's such an awesome concept, and hopefully it goes from strength to strength. So Justine and I, we actually met recently, well, not too recently, a few months ago now, on a Launchpad leadership training course that we just finished. Literally, what's today? Today's Thursday. We just finished on Tuesday.
Yeah.
We just graduated. It was phenomenal. It was a great 3 months of training with leaders across Australia, Jewish leaders, and we both were privileged to be selected to go on this training program. It was done via Zoom, and it was during that time where Justine actually gave a shiur or a leadership talk based on Jewish text, Jewish ideas to the cohort, and I was just so impressed and really enjoyed the shiur that I said, I'd love to give a talk with Justine, and I asked her, and she checked her diary, and after finding a time in a busy schedule, she agreed. So it's a real privilege and a real zchut, and really grateful that we've been able to do this.
And it's pretty special to be here. I was very overwhelmed when you called and asked me. It's lovely, but now I don't know whether to call you Daniel or Rabbi.
Whatever you feel comfortable. I'm easy with both. Daniel's good.
So just before we start, can I dedicate the shiur?
Oh yes, please do.
Happy for me to do that.
Yeah.
So just to dedicate the shiur for the refuah shalema of a young girl in Sydney who's been diagnosed with ovarian cancer. Her name is Eva Bat Rivka. So she had surgery today. So we were doing our learning in her honor this evening, that she should have a really swift and easy recovery.
Beautiful. So may she, please God, have a refuah shlema, and in the zchut of this learning, she should recover very quickly, please God. So thank you for that. So what we're going to do tonight, of course, is, as advertised, we want to try and, I guess, have a discussion and share insights and share just our own thoughts on, I think, a chag which is just so popular, a holiday which is just so exciting for so many people. I was actually reflecting on an article I'm writing for next week, and that, as a rabbi, certainly I find, or really anyone who's in outreach, when it comes to Chanukah, it's probably one of the easier ones to try and do outreach. I know when it comes to Purim, I know that when you go to people and you say, can I get you to celebrate Purim? And then they say, well, what's involved? And you say, well, so you got to sit down for the next 25 minutes while I read these strange Hebrew words to you and hear the Megillah. It's pretty overwhelming. And I know that I think this past year I read the Megillah, I think it was like 20 times or something like that. So Chanukah is easy. He has a candelabra, he has some candles. Go ahead and light a candle every night and eat donuts. I mean, how much easier could you get than doing that? So I love this chag. I don't know which is your favorite, Justine, but What do you think? It's certainly got such a popular aspect across the world.
I'm a fan of Pesach, actually.
Yeah.
So Chanukah comes and for me, it's exciting because then it means I can start thinking about Pesach. So Pesach in my house is like a mega insane celebration. We have artworks that transform the whole house. We literally move into Egypt, into the world of slavery. So for me, Chanukah is exciting for different reasons.
It's so interesting that Chanukah gets you ready for Pesach.
Yeah, well, that's when I'm starting to think, like who's coming and what different things are we going to do? Actually, I find Chanukah more difficult.
So they say that, you're supposed to learn about the Chag, as you know, 30 Yom Lifnei Chag, 30 days, you're already preparing months in advance. So you're ultra orthodox.
No, I'm really not.
Okay.
I'm a sucker for punishment, really. But I think what you said about Chanukah being an easy sell is really interesting. And some of the thinking that I was doing in preparation for this evening was around, are there any parallels between Chanukah and Christmas? And, if you're living in like a secular world where you see Christmas decorations everywhere and people have massive celebrations, Chanukah is, we don't just do it once, we do it 8 nights. The celebration goes on. So there are some interesting parallels with the way that we celebrate. And I do think that it is an easier sell to people because of the similarities between the two.
Yeah. And I think, for because it's such a popular holiday in America, Christmas, and I think the Jewish kids and the Jewish people feel that they've also got their holiday, for the end of the year. And I just think it's got such a beautiful, feeling about it. It's, as I said, maybe not because it's easy, but I think the universal messages of Chanukah, and we'll get to some of that as well. But I thought we would just start off with, maybe for some people on this who are watching or who might watch them later or on Facebook right now, just to run through some of the practical things very quickly. How do we light? When do we light? What should we be lighting with? So I don't know if you want to kick us off a little bit of that, and then we'll keep progressing, just like Chanukah. We'll go into some more.
You're going to be here for 8 nights, people. I hope you're comfortable. There's not a 1 hour shir.
Exactly.
I'm kidding.
It was only enough for 1 hour, and then it just
went on. Yeah.
8 hours.
So I think for me, coming from the young family space, one of the things that is really appealing about Chanukah is how creative you can be with the design of your Chanukiah. And I thought that might be an interesting place to start with, what is required of a Chanukiah? Do you actually need one? Can you just have, 8 tea lights in a row with one slightly in front? Is that okay? What do you do if you're traveling? Can it be a battery operated light, or does it have to be a lit flame? Those are some of the things that always strike me as interesting. How creative can we be?
That's an excellent question. And I think a lot of people do maybe at times get a little bit carried away in terms of becoming quite creative. And I think there's a very important rule that people need to understand, and that is how the Chanukiah should be aligned, if you like. And whilst you can be very creative with, and I think you'll show us a little bit later, some creative Chanukiahs that you've come across. I also have a number of, I guess, some of them as well. But I think the important thing for people to remember is that it needs to be in a straight line. It needs to be aligned, and other than the shamash, which we'll talk about, other than the candle which we use to light the other candles, they shouldn't be zigzag. So you shouldn't have sort of one candle here and then another one down there, another one down there. For one of the obvious reasons is that you might not realize what night of Chanukah is. You might think there's a few Chanukiot. So it needs to be in a very straight line. And as I said, in terms of the material, just be very careful that they're not flammable, which unfortunately has happened on times again. But tell us about the shamash, Justine. What is the shamash? What is its job? What is it doing there?
So I had it, and Daniel's asking me about the shamash because he doesn't know this, but I actually had a very interesting question from a colleague of mine in the US who was putting together some material for young families about Chanukah. And she wanted to know, do you say the brachot before you light the shamash or after you light the shamash? what is the requirement?
Yeah.
And we got into this very interesting conversation about the shamash, which is the separate candle that we use to light the other 8, is not actually part of the mitzvah. It's a separate part, and we have it as separate because the idea behind the Chanukah candles is that we shouldn't use them for anything other than celebrating Chanukah. So we have this shamash because just in case we somehow use the light from the Chanukah candles, we can say it comes from the shamash, that we're using the light from the shamash rather than from the other candles. Right. That's the interpretation that that grabs me. I was going to share a bit later, but I think I'll share now. There's a really wonderful teaching from Rabbi Mizrahi from Israel. For those of you who don't know her, she's very worth listening to. And she talks about the shamash as being the candle that gives light. And she has this beautiful analogy about what happens when you put one flame to another, one candle wick to another. She said, normally when you give something to someone else, you are depleted. So I give to Brandon, I give him a Launchpad leadership pen, and then I no longer have the pen and Brandon has the pen. But when you put 2 flames together, what actually ends up happening is the light from the flame grows. It's one of the rare instances where giving actually grows the product. And so she has this wonderful, I guess, metaphor looking at the role of the shamash and our job as Jews to keep giving, to keep sharing the light, to keep spreading, because that is the way we actually invigorate our own sense of Jewishness. That's our contribution to the world. And so when you ask me about the shamash, that's immediately where my head goes, is to what is my job as a Jew? How am I supposed to conduct myself? What is my role as a giver and a sharer of knowledge, and to be an inspiration to other people? Which sounds a bit tacky, that notion of sharing the light, but that's exactly what she's saying.
I love that idea. But I think also another interesting idea about the shamash, when I hear the word shamash, I think coming off that leadership course, the shamash sounds like the work. I know that when I was growing up in South Africa, the shamash of the shul was always the person who you always saw was busy. They were running around, schlepping things, moving things, taking things. And they were often behind the scenes. They were never in the limelight. They were never in the spotlight, and they didn't really get any credit for much. But yet they ensured everything was happening. And I think leadership in a way. The shamash, I think, is a very brave candle, and a very noble candle, in that it does all the work, and yet it's not really the mitzvah. It really doesn't get any of the glory, any of the airtime. But
and there's no blessing over it, right? The
blessing over it. It's just
the blessing is over the other candles. Yeah.
It's a worker bee. So I think we can all be inspired by the shamash. But at the same time, you said something to me yesterday when we had a brief chat about how the candles, really represent mindfulness. And if you can just elaborate on that further, because I really like that idea as well.
So I will elaborate it, but it occurs to me now, as you've said, shamash, I'm thinking about the word shemesh as well.
Yes.
And the connection between the shamash and the sun, which is something I actually have never read anything about. Have you ever come across anything about that?
With the sun and the shamash, interesting.
Yeah.
No, I haven't.
Anyway, that's just where my head went right for a second.
You can make up your own one now.
I don't know. I have to think. Give me a minute. I have to think about it. But all the candles.
The shemesh gives to the levana. The shemesh gives to the on its own. The levana doesn't have any light, and I guess that's right. The shemesh is the sun gives, and the shemesh.
We could also think about the sun and the moon. That's really interesting, and about inside and outside, and the light and the dark. I think there's something in there.
Let's write a paper on it.
A chidush. We made a chidush. It's very exciting.
Next week's article on the shamash and the shemesh.
The shamash and the shemesh, yeah, and the deeper themes of Chanukah, about the inside and the outside, the light and the darkness, which we can talk about in a bit when we talk about some of the themes of Chanukah and the connection to the Greeks and wisdom. Exactly. But the idea of mindfulness, when you light the Chanukah candles, we talk about practical stuff, so they're supposed to burn for half an hour. So obviously that's problematic when we talk about Shabbat and lighting Shabbat candles, but the Chanukah candles are supposed to burn for half an hour. And it's supposed to be that half an hour period where you don't do any work, because you can't use the lights for anything. You're supposed to just be and experience the light, whatever that means to you. So it's intended, in my view, as a forced opportunity to be suspended in space and time and reflect. And we have this idea of lehodot v'lehalel, that we should use the whole month of Kislev, this whole month that we're in, as a time of thanks and gratitude. So that half an hour, that prescribed minimum time of just being for 8 nights of Chanukah, is an opportune time for lehodot v'lehalel, to give thanks, to experience gratitude, and to be thankful for everything that we have. So it's really interesting when you think about Cheshvan as being the month with no Chagim, which is the month we've just had, and we move into this month, which is a time of gratitude and thankfulness. There are some interesting, I guess, like midrashic ideas about the meaning of the word, of this kislev, kisui lev, the removing the cover from the heart, exposing yourself, appreciating what you have, and speaking it out loud, like not hiding from it, and practicing your Judaism outside rather than hiding behind closed doors, which is a very Chanukah-related theme.
For sure, and I think that just segues nicely into where you should be lighting the Chanukah. And the original concept of Chanukah is what we call Pirsum Nisa, which means publicizing the miracle. And so therefore, I mean, there are varying customs as to where you should place it, but the general concept, and you see a number of people like to place it in their window so the world can see. And I think it's important, to recognize that we're all, in a sense, candle. We're supposed to light up the world around us. We're supposed to inspire our families, our communities, and just the general world. And I think, placing that Chanukah in a position where people can see it. And of course, the sad reality is that for so many generations, our people were under threat to place a Chanukah in the window. And so there's a whole
it's a big statement, right? It's up there with the Christmas tree in your window. It's a very public statement about who you are and what you hold dear and what you celebrate. Do you have a window that faces the street where you put your Chanukah?
In my previous place that I lived, we moved a couple of years ago to renting near the shul. We don't have one that really reflects into the street. It's actually, unfortunately, not unfortunately, but for Chanukah, it's unfortunate. It's what's that? It's like that stained glass. You can't really, not stained,
right?
Whatever you call it, and so you can't see out there. But I think, as a minimum, the halakha tells us to get our families together if we're blessed to have other people in our home. So at least we're spreading the miracle to our family. And I know someone once asked me, so what's the point of that? Isn't it about spreading the miracle to people that you don't know or to strangers? And I said, if you forget about your own family, if you don't see them that they need to be the people that you're spreading the light to as well, then sometimes you miss the entire message. And I'm really talking to myself, because as a leader, at times you're so focused on everybody else that you forget that your own home is the place which needs probably the most light. And so I love that.
Do all your kids have their own Chanukiot?
Yeah. Yes. They all like their own Chanukah. It's a very special time in the home. I think anyone who's had that experience, to have a number of Chanukiot lined up. I mean, my wife comes from a family of 10. And I remember I was there once for Chanukah, where everybody came back for the holiday, and there was just
wow.
It looked like it was a bonfire about to begin. So you got to be very careful. It wasn't like Bo'omer. We've got to just make sure we have a distinction. But yeah, it's so.
Do you have to light in your own home?
Should you light in your own home?
Are you required to? So if you're invited to someone say I'm invited to my lovely neighbors across the street, and I take my Chanukiot there, can I light them there and not have at home, or should I light before I go?
Best to have it in your home as well, but of course, just, and again, I'm just saying this in Australia, just be very careful not to ever leave your candles unattended, and it's really important to stress that. So better to join in the mitzvah at your friend's house than to leave an unattended Chanukah. But if you can light your own, and there is an opportunity to have your own one lit, but again, you might feel more comfortable taking your Chanukah to your friend's house and lighting it together with them. So,
and if you're, just while we're talking about halacha stuff, if you're in hospital, say, and you can't light a candle. Can you create your own Chanukah out of the battery operated ones?
Yeah, so I've been asked that question actually this year a number of times, interestingly. So obviously you're not actually fulfilling the mitzvah of lighting the Chanukah, but it's still important in terms of Pirsum and Nisa.
Right.
So you wouldn't say a blessing on it, but you should still light it because at least you're still demonstrating the festival itself. But what you could do if you don't have the opportunity is to contribute to someone else's Chanukah menorah. So let's say you have a friend, you say, look, I'd like to be part of your menorah, so I'll give you $1, next week or whenever you see them. So I've contributed to the mitzvah. So that's also an option to do if you go to somebody's house for Shabbos. Let's say you're going away for Friday and you're going to be at a friend's house and you want to contribute to let's say maybe they only have one person in the household lighting, you can contribute in that way. You can say, well, I'll give you $5 towards it as well. And now you've contributed to that mitzvah. So,
and can you explain to me, one of the things that I learned about Chanukah was that if you can't afford candles for Chanukah, you should sell something so that you can have candles, or you should borrow money from someone. Why is it so weighty? Why is it held up there as so important, like that you should give up something to have Chanukah candles?
It's a good question. I don't know why necessarily they've weighted in that way. I can only speculate and possibly think, it was, the theme of Chanukah is just such a powerful Jewish theme. I mean, there are other times where you should also do that, for
yes,
supplies and Shabbos candles and all that stuff. But I think because of the strong message of Chanukah in terms of rededicating the Beis Hamikdash, it's that we are serving as a light unto the nation. So all the different symbols of it maybe extend to that. Look, today, fortunately, I think if you go back in time, thinking what you said earlier in regards to not benefiting from the light. Obviously today with electricity, it's maybe not as practical. But I think if you go back then, it would have been a very significant thing to afford Chanukah candles. So, for us, we may just, when you say that halakha, it probably doesn't even register in our psyches because how much is a box of little candles? $2 or $3 or $5. But if you think about the sacrifice that people had to make when candles were extremely expensive, to have, coming to the 8th night of Chanukah, you've had to purchase a number of candles. It was a significant sacrifice. So it's quite a tough halakha to adhere to be honest, if in those days. But it's a beautiful thing to give of yourself. And they say that if you do spend on a mitzvah, Hashem repays you. I don't know if anyone's tested that.
Well, he might not repay you in this world. It might be in the next.
They say that these mitzvot which are required, you may. I mean, I once tested Hashem. I don't want to digress too much out of Chanukah, but I was living in South Africa. I was working there for a shul, and I asked the people in charge of the purse strings, as they say. I wanted to host a big Friday night dinner for young adults, and the guy said, "No, there's not enough money. And it's too expensive." So I said, "Okay." I said, "Hashem, you wanted me to do a mitzvah? You help me anyway." The next day, I had a friend from school who called me and said, "Daniel, I want to come see you in your office." Came to my office and he said, "Oh no, sorry, I left the most important part of the story." I said to my wife, I said, "Sarah, let's do it. We'll pay for it ourselves. Is there something we want to do? It's a mitzvah we want to do. It's going to cost us whatever it's going to cost us. It's for Hashem." Anyway, the very next day, a friend of mine called me and came to my office and he said, "We go back a while. We used to know each other in school. I've come into some money. I'm doing really well. And I've been thinking to give money towards a young adult function. Do you have any functions that you know of that I could sponsor?" So I said, "Oh, well, in fact, I know one." And he sponsored the whole dinner.
Wow.
I always said, "Hashem, you pay, Hashem pays back." That one was pretty instant. It was, I guess the modern times. He was on a quick response on the internet connection. But yeah, look, I think it is people, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this as well. Through my rabbinic experience, which is relatively short, people spend money on all sorts of things. When it comes to mitzvot, unfortunately, at times, people are not prepared to spend a little bit extra. So when people come to me and say, "Rabbi, what type of tefillin should I buy? What type of mezuzah should I buy?" I always say, go at least one beyond the entry level. Because I speak to Eli Gutnick, who's the software here, and I said, "How much is the cheapest mezuzah?" He says X. I said, "And what's the next one up?" Y. And I tell people, if you can, of course, if you're not, I'm not talking about if you don't have money, but people who, Baruch Hashem, when they go to to a restaurant, they don't buy the cheapest thing on the menu. They want the nicest bottle of wine. So we've got to be prepared to sacrifice what's important, and And I think mitzvot are really important. It demonstrates to our children the beauty of it all.
And so when we think about Chanukah, and we think about what we're actually celebrating, or recalling or recollecting, there's two standout miracles that I can see.
Yeah.
Can you see more than two? I can only see, well, I can probably see more than two. There's two standout ones.
Yes.
So there's the military victory, right? And then there's I have like a bit of a philosophical issue there. Do we celebrate a military victory? I don't know how I feel about that. Yeah. And then there's the miracle of the oil. And I read a really interesting thing that Rabbi Sachs asked a question. So the miracle of the oil was not really a miracle on the first night, because there was enough oil for the first night. So why is the first night part of the Chanukah experience? Like, why are we blessing on the first night? Which I thought was quite an interesting thing. I had never thought about that before. And is there a hierarchy with the nights? And maybe then that leads us nicely into the conversation, the argument between Hillel and Shammai about the process of lighting. You know, had you ever come across that question before?
Oh, yeah, it's a very famous question. It's a very famous question about, as you just said so eloquently, you know, why? And I think just to reiterate the question, why would you Chanukah should really be 7 nights? Because the first night technically is not a miracle, because, as you said, the jug was sufficient for 1 night. So it really should have been a 7-day holiday, and we would have got less presents. So, you know, it wouldn't have been very nice. So I'm happy with 8, but it could have been 9. It would have been even better. Although probably too many donuts if it was 9 days. You know,
yeah.
You can handle. So what did Rabbi Sachs provide a good answer? Because there's one answer that I know of, but I don't know if you came across his answer or not.
Yes, I did. Give me 1 second. I will find it. His answer was that we consider it even a miracle that A, they found any oil at all, and B, that they even thought they had faith enough to even look for oil. That with the desecration, that they even thought that they believed that there possibly could be something intact. So he gives those two responses.
That's very nice. So the answer that I've always sort of remember at the top of my head was that we celebrate the concept that the norm, that even the mundane is itself a miracle. You know, Chanukah, sometimes we're always thinking of, you know, what's the grandiose, you know, has the sea split, then I'll be happy, then I'll believe in God. But we forget that just getting up in the morning is itself a miracle. So Chanukah, the fact that we light 8 days is really a representation that even just the normal things, even just the fact that oil can burn, is itself a miracle. It is itself godly. So day 1 is really representing every aspect of the norm. And I think that itself is the greatest miracle. You know, we go through life and we get so accustomed to things which happen all the time that we forget about the miraculous nature of everything. It's going back to your point about mindfulness, you know, that sometimes when you take a moment and you just reflect on the gifts that you have, you see that you're actually a living miracle. Some more than others, some recognize it more than others. But even if you don't feel so miraculous, you are. So I think that's Chanukah. And Phil,
yeah,
7+1, going above and beyond. Absolutely.
Yeah, and Phil, it's interesting because I was thinking about the connection to 7 days of the week as well. Like, you know, the concept of the number 7 is it's one of those holy numbers in Jewish wisdom. And so is there some significance, exactly what you said, Phil, is there any significance to the 8?
Well, 7 represents the natural order of things, 7 days of the week, and 8 is that one beyond. 8 does represent now miracle, you know, the beyond nature. And so Chanukah in itself, as a whole, is really a miraculous experience. But I like Rabbi Sachs's answer too. I think it was very profound. You know, that sometimes you have to have the courage to even start. You know, you've got to try.
Yeah. Wow. So tell us, what was the debate between Hillel and Shammai?
So it's interesting. This past Monday night, we have our bat mitzvah group, and I put the question to them. I divided them into 2 teams. One was Beit Shammai, one was Beit Hillel, and they had to defend their position. You know, so the debate in the Gemara is one opinion, which is Beit Hillel says we should do what? We should light the first night 1 candle, the second night 2 candles, the third night 3 candles, and so on. And Beit Shammai, I think I'm getting that correct. Beit Shammai says the other way around. Beit Shammai says, no, we start with 8, and then we go every night. On the second night, we should light 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, we count down. And of course, we know who was victorious. Hillel was victorious because that's how we do it. But they say, in fact, in the times of Mashiach, we're going to revert to Beit Shammai's viewpoint.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So the Gemara says when Mashiach comes, we go to Beit Shammai's opinion.
Wow.
And so I asked the girls to each defend why we should either light 1 and continue lighting 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or count down. It was interesting to hear their answers. But there's a number of interpretations. I don't know if do you have any that you would like to share? I have a number that I could certainly discuss, but I'd love to hear if you have any that you've come across.
I came across an interesting parable from Rav Dessler.
Yeah.
But I think it's possibly too lengthy to share, but I'd be happy to refer people onto it.
Yes.
But he basically says that we light 1 candle on the first night, and we continue increasing and building our potential to the 8 candles on the last night, because we should strive for greatness, and we should know that reaching the heights of greatness takes work. You don't just start there.
Yeah.
And when you get there, you don't want to detract from it at all. You want to experience the magnificence of the greatness. Yeah. So that's he's got a lovely parable that he uses to explain it. But
So there's 2 ideas which I think are very, very practical. So the fire can do one of 2 things. It can illuminate, and it can also consume. Yeah. And so Beit Hillel's viewpoint was that the candles illuminating, every day when you illuminate something, when you light something, when you bring brightness, when you bring kindness, and you increase in that. But when you're eliminating bad, you don't expect the bad to increase. If you're eliminating it, then it should actually get smaller and smaller each night. And so Beit Shammai's viewpoint was very much, sur meira. Let's fight evil. Let's just destroy the bad, destroy the negative. And so from their ideological viewpoint, the first night is when the world has got too much negativity around. So we need 8 candles to dispel this darkness.
Interesting.
But on the 7th night, you're hoping that you've already done some good work, and so you only need 7 to dispel darkness. Whereas Beit Hillel's viewpoint is a much more positive outlook in life. It was tonight we're going to try to bring light to the world around us. Okay, and the next night let's do a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more. So positivity goes one way, negativity goes the other way, and that's why in practice we follow Hillel, because our primary objective in this world right now is to do what? Is to spread goodness, to spread kindness, and that can only go from one point. There is another idea that I heard, that Beit Shammai looked at the potential. When was the true miracle? The true miracle literally was really on the first night, because that's when the full potential of the miracle was in existence. You had the 8 nights.
Yeah.
Whereas Beit Hillel was following just a halakhic principle called that we ma'alin b'kodesh, that in religious aspects you always go up in holiness. You never decrease. It's like if you had your tefillin or your mezuzah case, you don't start using that for something mundane. Start using it for a cricket wicket in the summer or something. You can only use it for something more spiritual. So 2 different thoughts. One was going by the potential, and the other one was going by just the halakhic idiom of ma'alin b'kodesh. But really, some really practical life lessons there, I think.
And I think also beautifully connected to some of the deeper sort of thematic issues around Chanukah, of that difference between valuing wisdom for the sake of wisdom versus being open to spiritual growth, and the inside light, that perception of the Greeks and the Hellenistic sort of worship of man and man's potential versus the Jewish approach, which is, yes, man is great, but really man doesn't exist without God. And there is.
But you as an educator, and obviously that's your raison d'etre, you're an incredible educator, but would you not say that education has really changed from a sur meira approach to a asay tov? Meaning, if you look at how we used to try and get kids to do the right thing, it was always like a punishment. It was like, don't do this, don't do that, you'll get in trouble, you'll get this. And now it's shifted. The whole world has shifted to a Hillel approach, I think.
Well, more than just, I mean, I'm going to take us right to the end point where we were going to go, but I think it's more than just a shift to a Hillel approach. It's a shift to like a Mishlei approach, to, you know, educating everybody according to their way, finding what turns on the light of each individual student, rather than creating something to meet the needs of a group. The sort of recognition of the impossibility of one size fits all, and the value of the individual approach to learning, that sort of project-based approach to learning, that everybody should find their way. And
Right, not one size fits all. It's no longer about that.
No, and not at all, not at all. So it's a really interesting thing when we start to look at what does the Torah teach us about how to educate. I mean, I'm always sort of intrigued by Pirkei Avot and that notion of people being different types of vessels, how they hold knowledge. You're either a sieve, or you're a funnel, or you're a sponge, you know, and acknowledging what kind of learner you are, and then being comfortable with that, and finding like-minded people with whom you can learn. Because Rashi says that the idea of chinuch is really just the idea of beginnings. It's not the end. You're not learning like a body of knowledge that will take you right to the end. You're going on a journey, and it's really fascinating when we think about Chanukah and the connection to chinuch, to education, and we take the idea of Chanukah as being dedication or consecration, coming from the rededication of the temple. What's the connection there between education and dedication or consecration? You know, what does education actually mean? Why do we use the word chinuch rather than limud? What are the nuances? What are the nuanced differences between those things? So the biblical interpretation is that chinuch implies training or practice or repetition, whereas limud is acquiring knowledge. And so part of what we see on Chanukah is the practice of the ritual over 8 nights, and the opportunity and possibility of growing something over an 8-night period, so that you can culminate in knowledge, you can culminate in mindfulness, you can culminate in an experience of gratitude or thankfulness or togetherness with your family, or just being. And I think that's where we see that really interesting connection between Chanukah and Chinuch.
Exactly. And I mean, I'll just take a personal example. You know, the word chinuch, obviously, which means education, and as you said, the other word is dedication. I think when it comes to education, the greatest educators are the ones who lead by example, are the ones who are dedicated to their students or dedicated to the subject. I mean, I just look at a practical example. You know, children, your own children, they know when you're enthusiastic about a particular subject. You know, if I tell my son, you know, I want you to study the Talmud, and then he catches me 8 o'clock, you know, half asleep over my own Gemara, how much chinuch is that? He's saying, well, Dad, you're obviously falling asleep every time you learn, but if he sees me up at 3 o'clock in the morning, you know, streaming in to watch cricket that's being played overseas, he sees I'm dedicated, so he'll probably be an enthusiastic, you know, cricket fundi, because children look at us and they see, where are my parents dedicated, where are they passionate about? And so, you know, I don't want to get into the whole debate now, not with you, I'm saying in general, about, you know, whether a Jewish school is good versus, but, you know, a lot of people think that we'll just dump our child at a Jewish education place and let them take care of it. But when they come home and if they don't see the dedication, then the chinuch is not really going to be anything valuable. And I think you could probably talk on that for hours, you know, as an educator. And really, I think if we don't serve as role models for our children, then we might as well give up before we even start, because they're looking at it.
And there's probably, I mean, there's a lovely connection there with the symbolism of publicizing what we do on Chanukah, you know, living the life, like actually doing the mitzvah and showing everybody that you are doing it and not being shy about it, that there's something there about being the role model. And I mean, also when we talk about the shamash, there's a lot of connections there. You know, the shamash who just gets on with his job and doesn't need praise, and does it enthusiastically and shares the light, yeah, there's a lot of synergies
It's
there.
interconnected. It's so beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, look, the other thing I was thinking is that the word chinuch, the shoresh, if we look at the root of that word, Chanukah, has the hay added to it. And when I see the hay, I always think of Hashem. And then I think, okay, well, is Chanukah chinuch with a bit of godliness injected into it? And for me, godliness means joy. So are we going somewhere joyful around the experience of engaging in Chanukah, which takes us right back to the beginning when we were talking about what an easy sell Chanukah is. Yeah. You know, there's donuts and latkes and Chanukah gelt and presents and songs, and it's not just once, it's 8 nights. And
I found it fascinating you mentioned that the hay at the end, because literally last night there's a guy in our shul who's very Kabbalistic. He reads the Zohar, and he came to me and he said, why does it say when Yaakov went back, it says Vayele Charana? It used to be Haran. When he went, it was Haran. When he's coming back, it's Harana. So he actually said to me that he saw in the Zohar that anytime a hay is added, it means that the Shekhinah is now there, the presence of Hashem is there. And so maybe Chanukah is that now, if you're going to be dedicated to the Chinuch, Hashem's presence will be in your home. You know, if you do Chanukah properly, that's where the godly presence rests.
And for me, I'm not a fan of the word properly. So I'm going to steer you somewhere slightly differently, if I may. I think if we use the word with intention, because properly to me implies perfectly or correctly, and we're human. So I'm always looking for the way of how do we do a mitzvah with intention? And that's for me the godliness, right? The presence of the Shekhinah, that you're doing it with the right intention in mind, which for those people who are not au fait with halacha or with the particular way of doing things, it makes it much more accessible. And I'll throw into there's a beautiful, one of my favorite things to teach is challah. And there's a beautiful idea, we talk about the adding of the hay. So challah is just ordinary bread. It's chol, it's regular, that we put a hay on the end of, and we make the word challah out of something chol. And we take something regular, yom chol, something like that we would eat on the regular day of the week, and we elevate it with a little bit of hay, with a little bit of Hashem, with a little bit of the Shekhinah. We take these 7 very ordinary ingredients and we put a bit of ourselves into it, and that's what makes it unique, which elevates our Shabbat experience. So you see that quite often when you look, into the more metaphorical implication of language and things like this. There's actually a lot of very interesting significance.
Very powerful. The Hebrew language is godly language, and so therefore you're right. Every word is just it's designed perfectly to. But I think just going back to that point, and I love what you said about intent. But I think at the same time, I think it's very important to recognize that mitzvot. Of course, everyone should do it to their ability and try your best, and no one's going to come and say, oh, you didn't do it properly, you should be banished. Maybe some might, but that's not the right way to do it. But I think at the same time, if you look at the world around you, it's not always only about what's in your mind or in your intent. Sometimes you also got to be practical. You've got to do things correctly, and I think we should strive to try and amalgamate both those worlds. In fact, I think Yosef Ber Soloveitchik said that Chanukah is really the synthesis of both those worlds. You have the army, like you mentioned, the 2 miracles. You need to do the practical things, but at the same time, you then move into the spiritual connection. So I think it's funny. I remember hearing from someone, and I even experienced this in Israel. We used to go when I was in Yeshiva, we used to go to Tel Aviv to try put on, tefillin on, on Tel Aviv, and they're not always so keen. So they would always, we used to say, hinachta tefillin, did you put on tefillin? They would respond, halachta letzava, did you go to the army? Because of course there's a lot of tension between the religious, and I was, South African Jew there. So I said to them, I need Midrom Africa. And they're like, oh, Midrom. And then all of a sudden they liked me because I wasn't from Israel. And we got into this discussion. And often they'd say, Ani Yehudi Belev. I said, I'm a Jew in heart. That's what I am. I said to him, very good. I said, what about if you went to war and the army was coming, would you just sit there and say, I'm a soldier at heart, and but I'm not going to lift my gun. I'm not going to lift anything. And they understood the metaphor that at times you need to have. You can't sit at home and say to your significant other or say to your children, I'm thinking about you. I love you. Okay, well, where's the hug? Where's the care? Where's dropping me at sport? Where's taking me to this? You need both worlds. But I agree. If you're just doing the practical all the time and you've got no intention, I think it's tragic. At the same time, I think if you only have intention, but
Yeah.
you're not actually doing something, then it's also, you need both. You need both to.
Absolutely, absolutely. I came across something very, very interesting this afternoon when I was preparing for this conversation about, and it was actually from Rabbi Sachs. He highlighted that one of the central themes of Chanukah is this distinction between the inside and the outside, which we've sort of alluded to a little bit. And I'm just going to read what he said because I clipped it and put it in a Word document because it was really quite profound. And he says there is.
It's hard to say anything the way Rabbi Sachs says anything.
I know, there's no point in even trying. He says there is more than one command in Judaism to light lights. There are three. There are Shabbat candles, there is the Havdalah candle, and there are the Chanukah candles. The difference between them is that Shabbat candles represent Shalom Bayit, peace in the home. They're lit indoors. They are, if you like, Judaism's inner light, the light of the sanctity of marriage and the holiness of home. The Chanukah candles used to be lit outside, he says, outside the front door. And it was only really the fear of persecution that brought the Chanukah candles back inside. He mentions the Lubavitcher Rebbe who shifted the custom to light big public, Chanukah lightings in public spaces. Chanukah candles, he says, are the light Judaism brings to the world when we're unafraid to announce our identity in public, live by our principles, and fight, if necessary, for our freedom. As for the Havdalah candle, which is always made up of several wicks woven together, it represents the fusion of the two. The inner light of Shabbat joined to the outer light we make during the 6 days of the week when we go out into the world and live our faith in public. And that we need this combination of these two ways. He goes on to say, we can curse the darkness or we can light a light. We have to make that choice, which to me is quite profound when we talk about taking action and publicly acknowledging our identity and living with pride and embracing our Judaism. I think that's particularly
profound the way he says these things. But although I mean, maybe it's based on what's happened this week in my community. There's been, unfortunately, so many people are sitting shiva. There's been like 4 or 5 people who've lost their mothers in the last 2-3 weeks. Right. But I was just thinking, as you were saying, 3 candles, I'm thinking there's another candle, which is that
yes, the Yortzeit candle.
Is that Ner Neshama? There's that Yortzeit candle, which we should please God not have to experience. But I don't know. As you were saying it just dawned on me that there's sometimes in life there's setbacks. Sometimes there's a candle which represents, that we're human. That there's not always, there's going to be pain. And I think that's part of the Jewish experience. It's not, not always living in a dream world. At times, even though we trust in Hashem, even though we believe that everything's for the good, it doesn't mean that we don't feel, doesn't mean that we don't hurt, doesn't mean that we don't get angry and disappointed in God. I think it's also part of the experience.
That's very depressing.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
We'll pick ourselves up again soon. It's amazing. We've got 10 more minutes left. I just wanted to, just very, very quickly before we go into some a little bit more deeper stuff, but I don't even know if we have time, but just some of them in Hagim, the dairy foods, the oily foods, the dreidel. What if you just pick one minhag that you like and why you like it, and I'll do the same.
I could spin the dreidel all year round. There's something in fact, I actually have one here on my desk. In fact, I have 2 from my daughters. They live on my desk, and when I'm trying to concentrate because I'm at work at the moment, I spin the dreidel. For me, it's like a fidget spinner. I find it like it brings me to myself somehow. I love the universality of the object. I love the science of it. There's something really phenomenal about being able to spin something like this in terms of the shape and the size. And I love what it represents. I love the fact that it was a game that was created to save people or to hide something that was not supposed to be happening. So for me, it's the dreidel. Donuts. If I'm in Israel, it's donuts. But I was
going to say, if you look at me, it's definitely donuts. But the other thing is also, I really like the dreidel too. And I love the dreidel. I think as a community leader, what I love about the dreidel is they had to find, and yes, it was unfortunately for negative reasons why they had to find this way of entertaining the kids, because they had to pretend they weren't learning Torah. But I think, you've got to make it exciting. You've got to make Judaism fun. You've got to make it, and of course, whilst they're dreidel, today we have PlayStations and Xboxes and all sorts of things. It just takes you back to that basic premise that, when people come into shul, when people come to shiur, when people come to a chag, it can't just be like monotonous and without any feeling, without any excitement, enthusiasm. I think we've got to just really find a way to keep the children engaged. It's like almost like the Pesach story. We've got to find different ways to make them feel excited and ask questions. And
I mean, it's also interesting if we look at the shape of the dreidel and the opportunity for there to be different expressions, that it's all connected. It's one object, but there are multiple faces. And when I think about Judaism and community, I think about the multiple faces of community, and the fact that it has to stand on something. There has to be something to hold it, to guide the action, but at the same time we embrace the uniqueness of all the contributors. There's something really special about the shape. Right.
I never thought about what you just said. A spin top is useless until someone's actually doing something with it.
Yeah.
Things are great in theory. You can have all the ideas in the world, but unless you got someone spinning you, or yourself spinning that's something we gained, I think, over the last number of months, just listening to lots of ideas, lots of things. But it's when you actually just say, okay, I'm going to get on and do it. It's.
There's also for in many ways what the dreidel represents is the difference between, we touched on this a little bit, but the sort of that very Greek notion of what is knowledge and the power of knowledge, specifically for the service of man, and the Jewish notion that there is a God controlling it all. If you don't have someone to spin your dreidel, what are you? Right. So there's something.
Funny story, because you mentioned the Greek. When I moved to Doncaster Shul, we had a caretaker there who was I'm still close to him. He's the most awesome guy. His name's Peter, and he's from the Greek heritage. So I remember his first Chanukah, he was in the hall. We had a big function there, and I remember I was giving a speech, and I said, where the few overcame the many, where the Jews conquered the Greeks, and he was standing there thinking, what? These guys are about to attack me. So ever since, I always say they're Syrian Greeks, just so people from the Greek heritage now know it's not them. They're not enemies. Yeah. So he always used to laugh every Chanukah. He used to say, "Rabbi, it's you against me this holiday." So I just found it quite funny. But
do you want to open it up to questions?
Do we? Yeah. So typing questions, I think it'd just be easier to manage. But maybe just before. So whilst you've got typing questions, I'd just like to just say one. Maybe we can just each end off on an inspiring note. I didn't mean to depress anyone with but sometimes the greatest inspiration comes from when you're in a low space. When you see the vulnerability. I know every time, God forbid, I do a funeral, it really just reminds you of the vulnerability and the fragility and the temporary aspect of this life, and it inspires you to say, let me make the most of it. So it's not, it's not there to depress us. It's there to make us, as I say, ground us, but also hopefully inspire us. But I think there's so many things we could keep talking for hours. I don't even think, if people would be surprised, I don't even think we've touched.
No, we came in, we should just explain. So Daniel and I sat yesterday, and we had this great plan of everything we were going to cover. And the whole time as we were planning, we were going, it's only an hour. We're not going to get to that. But anyway, it's all in the plan. So that means there's an opportunity for part 2,
I think so. I think there is some opportunity.
So do you want to share your the insight, the Chanukah insight that speaks most to you? And I'll share one, and then we...
Look, I think one of the things which really just, every time I say the Va'al Nisim, which is the special prayer that we say on Chanukah, every time I think about Chanukah, besides for that concept of the light, and, going back to the victory, I think, why it speaks so loudly to me, because it shows you that even if you at times, I think we as human beings, we feel we can't accomplish anything. Who am I? I'm just one person. I don't have the ability. There's a big world out there. It's too massive. It's too much going on. And at times, I think, a lot of people might fall into depression and, we deal with mental health, because I think the world sometimes it's a lot of anxiety around us, and we feel we're not capable. We don't feel we have the strength. As I said, who am I to accomplish anything? The story of Chanukah, I think, talks to that individual and says, you can be a leader. You took the Maccabees. Imagine you were a Maccabee. You got this massive army beyond your wildest dreams. It's almost like our own, Israeli Defense Forces, in some way, who, you'd never believe that we're capable of any type of strength, any type of victory. And yet they were able to achieve the very reason that we're here today. The very fact that we can celebrate Chanukah is thanks to them believing that if you are dedicated, if you believe in yourself, you can achieve anything you want. And I think as leaders, and we're all leaders in our own right, whether we're official leaders or non-official leaders, you're a leader for yourself, you're a leader for your children, for your friends, for your colleagues. So believe in yourself. This holiday says to me, Rabbi Rabin, believe in yourself. You can achieve, you have these grandiose ideas, try them, even if you don't accomplish it all, you can do it, and so for me, it's just it's a holiday which says, just keep trying, keep moving, because you're able to do what you got to do. If you believe in yourself, that is, of course.
I love it. So for you, it's believe in yourself. For me, it is that idea that the light from one candle can illuminate something very mundane and ordinary and cast it in a very different light. So for me, it's that gratitude for the ordinary and really just appreciating every single thing that we have. Wow. Those things that we don't, we just totally, we just overlook. You just don't, you don't take them into consideration. So for me, I think it's going to be 8 days of just really appreciating every tiny little thing that I don't often acknowledge, or acknowledge often enough.
That's right, and that's goes back to that explanation of night number one is all about that. It's all about the mundane, the things we don't see as miraculous. So I think just if anyone, no one's really got any questions. I think we've answered them all beautifully. But just I think we were talking yesterday, both Justine and I. We've gone through COVID. It's been a really difficult year, and for all of us. And I think to end off on a high, really, that's what we plan to do. And I think we've just done that in our own way. But I wanted to just say one more thing, and you can also, I'm not trying to get the last word here, but
no, go ahead.
Because you were talking about the candle, lighting another candle, and you never diminish. You don't diminish if you're lighting other people, right? That's just the power of it. That's the power of spiritual gifts that you can give someone else. But I'm gonna give you a pop quiz. What's the one physical thing in this world that the more you give, the more you get? Physical thing, and it relates back to chinuch. And I think it's an incredible thing. I heard this insight a number of years ago, and no one's been able to find another thing in this world. But there's one physical, like you said, if you give your pen to Brando, your pen's gone. If I deposit $100 into your account, my bank account's $100 less. But there's one thing in this world, that physical thing, that you actually have to give it, you get more of it. Can you guess? Can anyone guess? Put it in the chat if you know what I'm talking about.
I want to say the flu, but I don't know how appropriate that is.
So it is when a mother nurses her child, when she gives milk, the only way to actually make more milk is to give the child milk. And it's an incredible thing, because that's our very first starting point in our life, is the lesson that if we want to get in life, we have to be givers. And that starts from the very beginning when we suckle. It's an incredible, isn't it? Think about it. It's the only thing in this physical world that you don't actually lose by giving. In fact, you have to give.
That's an awesome, I've never heard that before. That is super profound.
So
I love it.
And then we forget as we get a little bit older, we forget about that.
That's really, and who did you hear that from?
I don't remember. It was a number of years ago. Someone mentioned it somewhere. Maybe I was in a shiur or something, and I heard it. And it always resonates with me. Whenever we talk about chinuch or education, I always say that that's our starting point in life. Is to give. And maybe
well, now hang on a sec. Is the starting point in life to receive or to give?
Well, we're noticing from our educator that we're seeing from our parent that they're giving us, but they're actually, that's the way that they're receiving. So
right.
interaction. is through that one physical aspect in life, which doesn't deplete just by giving it away.
Huh. That's really, can I use that? That's really cool.
Absolutely. I wish I could, they say if you say something in the name of someone you heard, you bring peace to the world. So unfortunately, I don't remember where I heard it, so I'm not bringing much peace to the world.
But you'll just say in the name of the person that you heard it. Like it.
Yeah.
We'll just, pretend. But the other thing that I'll throw in that we wanted to share was, it has been quite an interesting year. Someone I work with said to me today that 2020 has been the longest decade, which I thought was quite cute. But it's, we've had the thing that I commented to you yesterday was that we've had this year where our experience of Chagim has been really quite challenged.
Yeah.
Cancelling your Pesach Seder days before Pesach, not being able to have people over for Shavuot, not Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur was like, for me, it was very, very strange. And I'm still struggling with going back to shul. It's still not quite right. I don't know why. But Chanukah, it looks like, is going to really be a kind of return. And I think there's like an extra joy in that.
There is.
Extra sense of wonder in being able to be together and with people, and the magic that brings, and that revelation and community and connection, I think is going to be particularly profound this year.
I think so. And I think, we advertised our family function, literally within a few hours it was sold out. There's like, people want to come and celebrate again. And I think in a way, I told you yesterday, the shul for me is obviously my place of work, and it's a place where I try and inspire people. And it's almost like our temple was destroyed. We weren't able to go in there. We were forbidden to pray and to be in the shul. And now we're like rededicating it. Chanukah, like we reliving Chanukah in an odd way, where the enemy hasn't been the Syrian Greeks, it's been COVID. So we're beating that enemy, and hopefully we can dedicate and light the Chanukah and bring light to the world around us.
Amen.
A lot of the world still needs a light. I was speaking to my brother in Cape Town yesterday, going through a major spikes over there. So we're very fortunate over here, Baruch Hashem.
We've really been insulated, haven't we? It's pretty amazing. We're very lucky.
Yeah.
We're very lucky.
Anyway, I want to wish you, Justine, I want to wish everybody else who's joined us a really beautiful and uplifting and illuminating Chanukah. And I love that word you used, and a Chanukah of intention, a Chanukah of mindfulness. And really, please God, to many more interactions. Justine, this was awesome. I really enjoyed it, and I've learned so much from you. And look forward to collaborating and inspiring and inspiring each other, and hopefully inspiring anyone else who's listened to us.
And how incredibly special that we have this Australian Jewish community that, because of COVID, can come together on a platform like Zoom, and share knowledge and celebrate together. So for me, it's been the one major highlight of coronavirus has been everything that Zoom has brought into my life. So thank you to COVID for facilitating this.
Exactly. And thank you to everyone who's joined us on Zoom, and those who are watching on Facebook or who will watch. And just a special shout out to some of our colleagues from Launchpad who made the effort to come and listen to us. We appreciate it, and we really enjoyed working with you guys the last few months. And Chanukah Sameach.
Chanukah Sameach, everyone.
Have a blessed Shabbos as well. Take care, everybody.
Bye.